Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here for this video. In chapter 7, we talked about motivation from a theoretical perspective. In chapter 8 here, we're going to talk about motivation applications, so the things we can actually do within our organizations to help motivate our people. When we think about factors in jobs that help to influence motivation, people often look at something called the job characteristics model. All right, now JCM basically says that there's 5 components to jobs that help to influence motivation. The first of these components is skill variety. So, what skill variety refers to is how many different skills people use within their jobs. Okay, so if you imagine working in a factory where all you do all day long is you pull the same lever and you pull it over and over and over again for 8 hours, that would be a job that had very little skill variety. A job where you go and work at different stations or maybe participate in different tasks, that might be a job that has higher skill variety. So, for example, I'm a professor and I teach classes. I teach 2 or 3 different actual classes during the course of a semester. I might conduct some research. I might present research. Might participate in different activities in the college. That would indicate that I have higher skill variety because I'm engaging in different things every day in my job. Okay. Next, we have task identity, and task identity deals with how much of something you actually take part in. So if we go back to our faculty, or excuse me, to our factory example, we can think about somebody who produces just a single part to an iPhone. Okay, they only produce one specific chip. They never actually see a completed iPhone. That would be something that would be low on task identity. Okay, something that would be high on task identity would be a job where you see a process through all the way to the end. So you might think of somebody who's a crafts person who does some type of labor where maybe they make products that are sold and they start with the basic raw materials and they see that product all the way through to the end. Or maybe you think about a chef who takes raw materials in the kitchen and turns those into a meal. Those would be positions that might be higher on task identity. Now, task significance deals with how your work influences and impacts other people. So, if your work has a high amount of impact on people, then it's high on task significance. If it has a low amount of impact on other people, then it would be low on task significance. So, for example, you may think of a doctor or a nurse who saves lives. That's obviously going to be a position that's high on task significance. In terms of a position that's low on task significance, that really can be something that's kind of perceptual because most jobs are going to impact people in one way or another. But you just want to think about positions where people may not necessarily recognize how their work is impacting others. Those types of positions would be low on task significance. All right. And then we have autonomy. And autonomy deals with the degree to which workers have freedom in their jobs. So if workers can make decisions, they are going to be high on autonomy. If workers have very specific processes and policies that they have to follow and they don't have the latitude to make decisions, then they're going to be low on autonomy. All right. And then finally, we have feedback. All right. And this is basically just how much information are you getting on your performance? So if a supervisor is telling you, "Hey, good job with that. Maybe you might want to change this next time," and giving you constant redirection that helps you understand how your performance is fitting into the organization's needs, then your position is going to be high on feedback. If you don't hear much from your supervisor, and I'll tell you, there have been some positions where that I've been in where I've hardly heard anything from my supervisor, then you're going to be in a position that is low on feedback. All right. And ultimately, what the job characteristics model says is that when we look at these kind of core job dimensions, they're going to influence various psychological states. And then through that influence, it's going to impact outcomes such as our work motivation, the quality of our work performance, our satisfaction, and even absenteeism and turnover. Now we can use the job characteristics model to calculate something called a motivating potential score. All right. And the way that we do this is we rate a position on the 5 core dimensions that we talked about: skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. All right. Then we take the average score for skill variety, task identity, and task significance. So we add up those three and we divide by 3. We multiply that by the score for autonomy and multiply again by the score for feedback. And that gives us the motivating potential score. All right. And as you can see here, the higher that a job rates on each one of these core dimensions, the higher the motivating potential score, the MPS, is going to be. All right. And the higher the MPS is, the more positive outcomes we should see in the workplace, such as lower turnover and lower absenteeism. All right. The lower the MPS is, though, the less motivation we're going to see our employees have, more turnover, we're going to see more absenteeism, more negative outcomes are associated with a low MPS. Now, as we've discussed here, the presence of the core factors in the job characteristics model that we've talked about are associated with higher performance and more satisfying job performance. All right. And also what we found with some research in the field of R&D professionals is that when leaders show supportive behaviors, they can actually improve these core characteristics in the job characteristics model, thus leading to more satisfaction and better performance. Now, one of the ways that we can improve the core characteristics of JCM is through something called job rotation. Okay, and job rotation helps to address the repetitive nature of jobs, and repetitive jobs obviously have very little variety. So there's very little skill variety involved in these jobs. And often repetitive jobs have little autonomy because employees don't have choices to make. They just have to do the same thing over and over and over again. All right, so we can address these two components through job rotation. Sometimes we hear about this being referred to as cross training, but really we have to go through cross training for job rotation to be successful. What we're doing in job rotation is we're shifting people from one task to another or from one job to another. All right, so when I was managing in the field, there were a variety of times that I would rotate people from one job to another, from one task to another. In particular, when I was a pricing manager, I was responsible for all quotes that my company sent out. And what I noticed was that when I took over my role as a pricing manager, I had different people who worked in different areas. So different people quoted different product lines and sent things out. But what I noticed over time was that the amount of quotes that were requested for one product line were not always consistent with the number of quotes that were requested for another. So one day, my person who worked on lumber might be super busy. Another day, people who worked on trim might be super busy. Another day, people who worked on windows might be super busy. But they were rarely all super busy at the same time. Okay. So I went in and I put a job rotation system into place where we focused on training everybody in a different job so that they could step in and help when the time came that this was needed. Okay. And at first, candidly, when we look at the weaknesses here about disruptions, extra time, questions, at first my employees were actually kind of resistant to this because they really weren't comfortable with learning a new skill. But over time, we showed them that everyone had the ability to learn, and they actually seemed to really enjoy developing these skills. And it also created stronger teamwork because employees were able to help each other out when they needed help. Reduced boredom a little bit too. And what I found was that the frustration in the workplace decreased a lot because people were able to move from one thing to another and just kind of shift the work that they did and help each other out more often. Now, job enrichment deals with increasing the level of responsibilities associated with the job. So sometimes job rotation can actually support job enrichment, but at the bigger from a bigger picture standpoint, what we're looking to do with job enrichment is allow people to move up to another step in the work that they're doing. So this may actually contribute to task identity because they may see more of the work being done, and job enrichment really can be effective at increasing motivation and reducing turnover. Now, relational job design deals with connecting people in the workplace with those who are benefiting from their work. And one of the best examples of relational job design that I can think of comes from an interview with Bernie Marcus, one of the founders of Home Depot. And in this interview, Bernie talked about how important it was to connect employees to the employees and the work that they were doing to the people who were benefiting from that work. And he said, he said Home Depot is a home improvement store. He said everybody who comes into Home Depot has some kind of problem. Maybe their toilet's not working, maybe their paint's disgusting. There's some type of problem that they're trying to deal with here. And he said what we did was we made our employees understand that they were solving those problems, okay? And that by helping to solve those problems, they were making a real meaningful difference in the lives of our customers, and doing that and getting them to understand that also helped to make a meaningful difference in their own lives. In addition to designing jobs so they can be more motivating, we can also create alternative work arrangements that help to motivate our employees. And one of these types of alternative work arrangements is called job sharing. This is a situation where two or more people split a 40-hour a week job. And what this helps us to do is it helps us to create situations where people who might not have the ability to work a full 40 hours can still earn at a rate that is not discounted for part-time wages. As we know, part-time employees often get paid lower rates than full-time employees. All right, this is kind of declining in use though when we talk about job sharing. One of the reasons is it can be difficult to find people who can work together and coordinate everything that has to be done with one job. The only time that I can recall really seeing this in person was a high school in an area I used to live in had co-principals. It was a job sharing situation where a pair of spouses actually split the salary and had a benefits package. But job sharing is still out there, and it is something that we want to be aware of, so that if this situation does come up where we can use it, that we can take advantage of it in our organizations. Now, what is a little more common than job sharing is something that we call flex time. And flex time is a situation where we essentially have core hours that people work. So we have basic times that we say, this is when we need our employees. All right. So the core hours, we say here it could be 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., but it's times that we're going to have meetings, times that might be relevant to our customers or our client base. These are our core hours when we say all hands on deck, so to speak. And then outside of that, people can either choose to come in early or they could choose to come in late. They can pick the flexibility of their schedule outside of their core hours. All right. So years ago, I used to be a high school teacher, and we obviously had to be present when students were present. But our superintendent allowed teachers in our school to either be people who came in early or they left late. And he said the school benefited from it because we had more coverage in the building. We had people in earlier and out later than if we all had to be in just a little bit early and a little bit late. And for the faculty, we all felt that we benefited from it because we could arrange things like picking up our kids, getting them to sports, getting them on the bus in the morning, based upon whether or not we chose to be early risers or late leaves. Now, related to this topic, I actually have some work in this area where I do some research, looks at data in a Fortune 500 company, surveyed 838 information technology professionals. About a quarter of the people surveyed were managers. About three quarters of them were employees. All right, and data were collected every 6 months. All right, so that let 4 rounds of data collection, and it was collected at two different locations. All right, and what we did was we used this data, and I didn't actually collect the data. This is from a publicly available data set, but the data asked people a variety of questions, including some questions about flexible work arrangements and attitudes and outcomes that are related to them. The two components related to flexible work arrangements were scheduling flexibility, which asked people questions about their freedom to take days off, their choice of start and end times, taking personal phone calls, and things along these lines. And also family supportive supervisor behaviors. All right, and these ask people questions about if they could talk to their supervisor about home and work conflicts, if their supervisor helped solve some of these conflicts, all right, and if the supervisor organized work to help benefit the employees. Now, what we found as we analyzed this data is that, like you would expect, flexible work arrangements were shown to be negatively related with work family conflict. Okay, so basically, the more flexible work arrangements somebody had, the less likely it was that they were going to find that their work was interfering with their family. All right, as a result of this, we saw that flexible work arrangements had a positive relationship with job satisfaction. So, the more somebody perceived that they had flexible work arrangements, the higher level of job satisfaction they expressed. And related to that, flexible work arrangements were negatively related with turnover intentions. So the greater perception of flexible work arrangements that someone had, the lower levels of turnover intentions they express. So essentially, what we're showing here in this model is that through flexible work arrangements, we can essentially work to reduce work family conflict, increase job satisfaction, and decrease turnover intentions. Now, what's really cool about this data, and yes, I just said data is really cool, is that we had a time series nature to it, right? So we had data at a baseline time period, 6 months later, 12 months later, and 18 months later. All right. And what we're looking at here on this chart is the relationship between flexible work arrangements and turnover intentions. All right. And we're looking to see how does that relationship change over time. So if we take a look at the family supportive supervisor behaviors, that's this yellow dashed line. As we follow this here, we see that there are some minor changes here, but this relationship really didn't get weaker or stronger with time. Okay, it pretty much stayed the same. Yes, there are some minor differences, but when these were tested, there was no significant difference between time periods. All right, and when we look at scheduling flexibility, we see something very similar. Some downs, some ups, some downs, but nothing that was statistically significant. So no changes that were major in any way, shape, or form. And you could see if we plot that line, it's pretty flat there. All right, and what this tells us is that the relationship between our flexible work arrangements variables and our turnover intentions was consistent. In other words, it didn't get weaker and it didn't get stronger. All right. So, why does this matter? If you ever think about when you've had a relationship with someone and it started to go bad, sometimes things get worse with time. Okay. So, the more someone starts to annoy you, the more you start to dislike them, the more you think you can't work with them anymore. All right. So, initially, we kind of thought that we might see something here, right? Where the relationship between scheduling flexibility or family supportive supervisor behaviors and turnover intentions would get stronger over time. So if you felt like you had no scheduling flexibility, then that would be a stronger predictor of turnover as time went on. But we didn't find that. We found that these relationships were fairly stable. All right. And that's really great for managers to understand because what it essentially tells us is that there's an opportunity for us to fix things, an opportunity for us to make changes. So just because we don't have um, some of these flexible work arrangements in place today doesn't mean that we can't put them in place and impact our employees' turnover intentions in the future. So, as we start to think about alternative arrangements or keep thinking about alternative arrangements, the next one we're going to talk about here is telecommuting. Okay. And telecommuting is basically a scenario where employees do their work from home a few days a week and they're linked with computers and phones and technology and so on and so forth. Right. And telecommuting was something that there was a lot of discussion on. Um, Prior to 2020 because people didn't know if it was efficient or not efficient. But really, once the world went on hold, so to speak, with the COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020, telecommuting became something that was a lot more common. Okay, it became something where people in various positions that we never thought would telecommute started telecommuting because of the pandemic. So the pandemic is really starting to change the way that we think about this type of alternative work arrangement. Now, telecommuting brings some advantages with it. First and foremost, it's positively related to objective job performance and to job satisfaction. All right. And one of the reasons that telecommuting could be related to job satisfaction is because of its relationship with work family conflict. By reducing work family conflict through telecommuting, we provide a pathway to increase job satisfaction. All right. It's also associated with reduced carbon emissions. So we saw this shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020, right? When almost the entire world was either staying home or working from home or not going into work, we saw an incredible decrease in carbon emissions. So that's one example of how telecommuting can impact the environment. There are also some disadvantages to telecommuting. Okay, so from the employer side, there can be perceptions that there's social loafing, that employees might not be working the entire time, and this is where, however, employers really need to think about managing a different way. Part of the reason that they have this perception of social loafing is that when people are in the office, managers can see what people are doing. They're comfortable with that. They're managing processes. All right, when people are working remotely, managers can't see what's happening all the time. They really have to manage based upon outputs. So there's a little bit of a transition in thinking that has to be done there. Sometimes it can be difficult to coordinate teamwork. Right? It can be easier when you're in the office and you can just walk up and talk to somebody, or maybe you all work in the same space. There could be a little more challenges. All right. Having said that, with technological improvements, we are finding more and more ways to coordinate teamwork remotely. All right. It can also be difficult to evaluate non-quantitative performance. So we might have some challenges here in, well, what about things that we don't have objective data on? All right, how do we evaluate that performance? From the employee's perspective, sometimes there can be increased feelings of isolation and reduced relationship quality with coworkers, particularly when some people are teleworking and other people aren't teleworking. Those who are teleworking may feel more isolated than those who are in the office. All right. And employees may not always be recognized for their efforts because their efforts aren't quite so visible. Now, when we look at who teleworks, we can see there appears to be a relationship between education and the percent of people who do work from home. Okay, so we see over here on the right hand side that those with less than a high school diploma work at home pretty rarely. All right, but we see a much greater number here, 39.2%, according to this data from 2016, when we're looking at people with a bachelor's degree or higher. Right, and part of the reason for that is because people who have a higher level of education may qualify for jobs that are easier to move into remote locations. Um, People who don't have that high level of education, they may find themselves more in service oriented jobs where they need to be present. They may find themselves more in jobs that involve manual labor, like in a factory, in a warehouse, on a construction site. Obviously, those types of jobs can't telecommute. But over here, the people who have a bachelor's degree or higher are more likely to find themselves in an office type position where you can work remotely using a computer and a headset and tools like that. Another way we can help to motivate our employees is through something called employee involvement. And employee involvement is a process that uses employees' input to increase their commitment to the organization's success. Two of the most common types of employee involvement programs out there are participative management and representative management. We're going to break each of them down in a little more detail. Now, participative management involves getting employee feedback on steps that you're going to take in your organization. So sometimes this feedback is solicited informally, so maybe through discussing things with different people. And other times it can be a little more formal, like through a survey or some type of major data collection effort. All right, now what we do with this is we collect this information from our employees, and then as we're making our decisions, we have some understanding as to how our employees would feel about some of the impacts involved in the decision. All right, and this can be a great way to get some involvement. Um, some of the studies that have shown results here, though, have shown mixed results in terms of the effect of participative management on organizational outcomes. One of the problems that we have to be aware of is that our participative management needs to be genuine. So if we're getting people's feedback or we're conducting surveys and then we're not actually using the feedback, that could be a little challenging because our employees might not believe they actually have a voice in what's happening. Or we may have employees who have very different feelings on a situation, and then whichever side we end up going with, the other side is going to feel like they weren't heard. So that's one of the challenges with participative management. It may actually contribute to some of the mixed results that we've seen. Representative management gives official roles to employees who help to work with management in making decisions. So two of the most common forms that we see are work councils, which are often a group of elected employees who meets with management and discusses issues with them and helps inform management as to their perspective on decisions, and board representatives. And when we have board representatives, we may have a single employee or we may have multiple employees who actually sit on the company's boards. And through those roles on the board, they're able to make some decisions. Okay, challenges with this that we can see here are that one, if employees are sitting on a board, they may start to see the board's perspective on things more and maybe not advocate for employee perspectives. Or if they are too confrontational, they may be viewed as adversaries and not necessarily be able to make much of an influence. So when you're selecting employees who may be your board representatives, you want to think about people who are going to continue to advocate for the employees' rights, but also do so in a persuasive way, in a way that is respectful of others, that they're going to be able to get their point across as opposed to come across as an obstacle in board meetings. Now, we're going to move forward talking about a variety of different ways that pay can be used to motivate our employees and how pay does motivate our employees. Okay, so one of the first concepts that we're going to talk about as we think about what to pay is internal equity versus external equity. All right, and internal equity deals with the equity of pay within our organization. External equity looks at equity of pay outside of our organization. Okay, so one of the great examples to use here actually comes from faculty. All right, from professors. So I am an organizational behavior, human resource management faculty member. Okay, people in business schools tend to be compensated fairly for their services, but we don't all get compensated the same way. So a finance professor probably makes more money than me. So some people would look at that and have concerns that that's an internal equity issue. And I ask the question, well, should I be upset that finance professors probably make more money than I do? And some people always come back and say, "Oh, yes, you should be upset." But other people say no. And the people who say no say that I shouldn't be upset because there's external equity in my pay. Okay. And what that means is that if we were to look outside of our organization and look at other colleges or look at industry, if we decide to leave our organizations and go to industry, people with expertise in finance get paid more in industry than people with expertise in organizational behavior and human resource management. So even though we have what could be perceived as an internal equity gap between those two positions, there is external equity because the positions are compensated similarly to how they would be in other organizations. Now, beyond that, some organizations like to pay their leaders above the market or pay their employees above the market. And what that means is they might pay a little more than other companies. And what this does is this helps to bring you a larger pool of applicants when you open up jobs. And by bringing in larger pools of applicants, you have the ability to be more selective. Okay, I worked at one company in my career where we paid our entry level employees very, very low. And it was almost like somebody applied for a job they were guaranteed to get hired because we couldn't afford to lose anyone who applied for a job. Other companies I've been at have paid at or above market rates, and they've been able to be very selective in their hiring processes. In addition to thinking about base pay, we're also going to talk about some variable pay programs such as piece rate plans, merit based pay, bonuses, profit sharing, and employee stock ownership plans. So let's break each one of these down. A piece rate pay plan goes ahead and pays employees based upon the number of pieces that they produce or number of pieces that they move of a product. Okay, so instead of giving them an hourly wage or salary, what we might see is we might see somebody who works in a warehouse being paid, say, 15 cents per package picked. All right, and then they need to pick a certain number of packages in order to earn the pay that they want to earn. In a factory, we might see a wage of X number of dollars per product produced. Okay. Now, piece rate plans can help to make sure that people are working hard and that they're efficient. If you're in a warehouse and you're being paid per piece picked, you're obviously going to try to pick a lot of pieces. All right. One of the downsides to a piece rate plan though is that people may be a little bit less careful in their work. So they may pick some damaged pieces. They may not worry about whether or not something they produce is perfect because they're very, very focused on the quantity that they're going to produce. All right. You also can have some internal politics associated with piece rate pay plans. So you might see your more experienced employees pick the easier tasks because they know which tasks are going to be easier to get paid on. And then the reality is what you have is you have your most experienced people doing the easiest tasks and your least experienced people doing the most difficult tasks because the more experienced people know how to earn more money. Okay, but we can work around that because we can have managers assign tasks out instead of letting employees pick exactly what it is they do. The other limitation for a piece rate plan is how do you apply it to a lot of different jobs? Okay, so there are for factories and warehouses, it can work very well. All right, but what do you do in the case of, you can't take a college professor and give them a piece rate pay plan. All right, it's very, very challenging to take, say, a lifeguard and give them a piece rate pay plan. So there's very specific jobs that this can be applied to. Now, merit pay deals with giving people differences in their annual increases of pay based upon their performance. All right, so let's say we have an employee whose salary is $50,000 a year. They might get a 3% increase if they're an outstanding performer. They might get a 2% increase if they're a satisfactory performer, and they might get no increase if they need improvement. Okay. One of the great things for the employees about merit based pay is that once you earn it, you've got it moving forward. So if you were at $50,000 a year and you got a 3% increase, you would get a $1,500 raise, and now your salary is 51.5. And then next year, your merit pay is based upon that new base rate. All right, so that's definitely an advantage for the employee. Merit based pay is good because it ties your reviews into your compensation. So performance reviews are very meaningful. Okay. One of the challenges with merit based pay is that because employees earn it forever, you may have people who are very top performers for 10 years and they see their salaries increase and increase and increase, and their performance drops off, but you can't do anything to adjust their pay really to account for that. So that can be a little bit challenging. Another challenge is that the merit pools fluctuate. And what that means is one quarter we might have more money to give merit based pay than we have in another quarter. Or we could have a situation where we have a severe equity issue with pay, and the merit pool is used to adjust for that equity issue, and then that takes away from what other people can earn in terms of merit. So we have to be careful not to make adjustments with the merit based pay pool that are not based upon merit. Now, a bonus is it could be an annual or it could be a monthly payment that you get for satisfactory performance. Okay, this is above and beyond your salary, but it's a one-time payment. Okay, so this does not add to your salary. Bonuses can be great because if they are tied to performance, they incentivize employees to perform well. Okay, but they can also be challenging because if too much of your pay is tied to your bonus, then that creates some income instability. All right, the first management position I ever had, I basically could double my salary through my bonuses, which was nice that I could earn that much more, but it also made me very vulnerable to changes in the market, changes in company performance. And truthfully, when I had another company come in and offer me a position that was similar in compensation but had a higher percentage of salary, that was something that was very attractive to me. So if your employees have to rely too much on bonuses, you have to remember that they may be concerned about the stability of their pay. Profit sharing plans are similar to bonuses in the sense that they are one-time payments that employees get for good performance, but they're a little bit different from bonuses because bonuses typically have set amounts tied to them, whereas with profit sharing plans, we have kind of a formula that we apply to the company's profitability to pay out these payments to employees. All right, and often these payments are based in part by an employee's current wage, the hours they work, and metrics of that nature. All right. And what this does though is it allows your employees, particularly those who may not be bonus eligible, to benefit from company performance so they have a little more vested interest in company performance. I can tell you one organization that I worked at, the employees typically got very low profit sharing checks because they weren't performing at a very high level. And I went in and we increased profitability about 40% in my location. My employees got very good checks that year. And one of my employees came up to me afterwards, after the checks were distributed, and said, I never got a check this large in this company. And they said, quite honestly, I didn't necessarily always understand all of your methods as a manager, but now that I see how it's impacted my bottom line, I've bought in. So, from my experience, I can see that profit sharing plans, when they're communicated well and they result in the employees benefiting from them, they can be very effective. Okay. But when the employees aren't benefiting from the profit sharing plans, obviously they're not going to have that much of an impact. Next, we're going to take a look at employee stock ownership plans. And what these types of plans do is they basically allow your employees to acquire company stock, often at less than the market is charging for the stock. And it helps your employees become owners in the company. If they become owners in the company, they should care about the company's well being. So, when I was in industry at the time that I worked for a Fortune 500 company, we had an employee stock ownership plan that allowed me to purchase our stock at 10% below the market value. So immediately it was like I had a 10% return on my money. So I had a certain percentage of my paycheck dedicated to just making purchases in the employee stock ownership plan. So I was buying the stock at around $25 a share, and the value was increasing and increasing. And I think I sold it all at like 35 or $40 a share, something like that, well after I left the company. And that was a very nice return on my money. I don't really like to think about it because that stock now trades at well over $200 a share. So selling it at 40 was a pretty bad decision. But the point is, because they gave me that incentive, that 10% off to buy a company stock, every paycheck that I worked for that company, I was investing in the company at the same time. And it did have an impact in terms of making sure that I cared about the company's well being. So, do these pay plans really motivate employees? What the research tells us is generally they do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's equally motivated by them. All right. During my time in industry, I definitely saw employees who were not necessarily motivated by bonuses or not necessarily motivated by profit sharing. But for the most part, these plans do have a positive impact on employee motivation and consequently their productivity. Now, beyond pay, we also are going to take a look at benefits. All right. And one of the things that's very important in our organizations is having a flexible benefits package. And what we mean by this is that we recognize that not all benefits packages are going to meet the needs of all employees. So one size fits all doesn't work. What we mean by benefits is we're talking about health insurance, dental insurance, vision insurance, and these types of programs. All right. So I take a look at myself. I have 4 kids. My kids all played sports. Um, Emergency room visits were not all that uncommon for us. So for me, I was looking typically for a plan that had a pretty low deductible. Okay. I also would look for a plan that maybe we didn't have to pay all that much if we went to the emergency room. Some plans you have to pay $500 to $1,000 per ER trip after insurance. So I was looking for plans that were maybe less than that. Okay, because these were the things that were important to me when I considered what my costs were going to look like. All right, other people who don't have such big families, maybe didn't commonly have as many injuries as we did, whatever the case may be, they may prefer to have a little bit of a lower monthly premium but have to pay a little bit more if they have an accident because an accident's a little less likely for them. All right. Because of these differences that we have amongst our employees, flexible benefits help us out because what we like to do is be able to have, 3, 4, 5 plans that our employees can choose from. Employees can opt into dental, they can opt out of dental, they can opt into vision or opt out of vision. And this helps us meet the needs of all of our employees. And we're going to wrap up here talking about employee recognition programs. And recognition programs are just ways that we can recognize and reward our employees in not necessarily a monetary way. Okay, so it can be a verbal program of just making sure that we go around and recognize people verbally. We might have an employee of the month award. All right, some places that you go to now, you'll see that they actually have special parking spaces for the employee of the month. All right, and these programs can definitely be motivating. They have very low cost associated with them. All right, but there are some challenges with recognition programs. For one, your employees need to believe that they're fair. Okay, if it seems like the same employees are getting recognized over and over again and other people aren't getting recognized, then that can be problematic. I worked for a consulting company where I was launching some really important projects, big projects, working with executives within the state, things that were giving good visibility to our company. And I was never recognized on our public recognition board. Okay, I'd get the email once a week saying who was recognized on the board. It got to the point that I saw that email and I just started deleting it because I never got recognized and it became so frustrating to me. I didn't even want to know the recognition system existed. Okay. In other cases, I've seen it where recognition programs get tied to bonuses, where once someone's recognized a certain amount of time, the employee gets a little bonus, but then the employees start to focus more on the money than on the recognition. And you might as well just have a bonus program at that point. Recognition program's not necessarily doing what it should do. All right. The other thing is we just have to make sure that there's a fair way to evaluate people. Um, how are we going through here and making sure that everyone who deserves recognition is getting recognized? And that might be having all of our managers do kind of like a quick run through of their people to see who needs to be recognized or who deserves it. But we do have to make sure that there is an equitable process. One of the challenges that we can have here is sometimes some managers are more likely to recognize employees than other managers are. So then, based upon the luck of the draw in terms of who somebody works under, they may be less likely to be recognized, and that can actually be demotivating. And with that, we are going to wrap up putting motivation into practice. Thank you for joining me. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great day.